Welcome back to Talking Wizards, the show in which we talk to towering figures from the world of magic and enchantments. Today we are at the home of Mr. Cornelius Fudge, a man due to his role in the recent history of the wizarding world is taught about in every school of witchcraft and wizardry all over the country. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mr. Fudge. It's not often we hear from you these days.
Well, Miss Sterling, it's not often I'm asked, but I suppose it's time to set the record straight. There's been a lot said about me over the years, as you have alluded to. Some of it fair, some of it not so much.
And we will explore as much of that as we can. Let's start with your time as Minister for Magic. You held that position from 1990 to 1996, a period that saw significant changes and challenges. Looking back, how do you view your tenure?
Let me begin by stating that it was the most difficult period in our history that any Minister for Magic had to contend with. Bearing that in mind, it was inevitable that my tenure would be marked by efforts to keep our world safe and stable. That's what a minister is supposed to do, maintain order.
One of the most notable aspects of your time in office was your refusal to acknowledge the return of Lord Voldemort. Many believe that this delayed the wizarding world's ability to respond to the threat. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Goodness me, that didn't take you very long, did it? No wish to know how a retired old man is doing first?
I will be sure to ask you, Mr. Fudge. I would just like some clarification on these matters to begin with, if that's okay.
You know, I'm sick to death of this narrative, Miss Sterling. People love to forget how uncertain things were back then. We didn't have concrete proof that Voldemort had returned, just the word of a few individuals who were, quite frankly, not in positions to make those kinds of determinations. And let's be clear, I wasn't the only one who was sceptical. Many in the ministry, and in the wizarding world at large, shared my doubts. But it's always easier to point the finger at the one who was in charge, so I'm blamed for it, of course.
As we know, it turned out to be the truth, Mr. Fudge.
Look, it's all well and good to say that now, after everything has played out, but at the time it wasn't so clear. Panic was the last thing we needed, and I wasn't about to throw the wizarding world into chaos based on rumours and speculation. We had just come out of one dark period. I wasn't about to usher in another without solid evidence.
Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore, during the time, were insisting on Voldemort's return. Many view that period as one where the ministry, under your leadership, aggressively sought to discredit them. How do you justify those actions now?
Discredit them. Is that how people are framing it now? Let me be perfectly clear, Miss Sterling. At the time Harry Potter was a boy, a teenager, who had been through more than most of us could ever imagine. I never doubted that he believed what he was saying. But belief alone doesn't make something true. He had experienced a great deal of trauma, and the chances of him seeing Voldemort, but not really seeing him, was quite high, in my opinion. And as for Dumbledore, well, his influence and reputation were such that when he spoke, people listened whether or not what he was saying was accurate. I couldn't risk creating chaos because of a man's reputation. All I demanded was evidence.
What kind of evidence were you looking for, Mr. Fudge?
The kind that leaves no room for doubt.
Were you waiting for photographic evidence, seeing him for yourself? A testimony from someone you deemed more trustworthy?
Yes, actually, all of those would have sufficed, but no such evidence was put to us.
During the 1995 Triwizard Tournament, a young student by the name of Cedric Diggory was, we now know, killed by Voldemort. Harry Potter told the world that it was Voldemort who committed that heinous act. Was his death not enough?
Hold on. What you're doing now is pulling on heartstrings, Miss Sterling. Yes, Cedric Diggory's death was a tragedy, and I too mourned when he was killed along with everyone else. Nevertheless, and do not misconstrue what I'm saying here, we have to set emotions aside when in a position of leadership. I and those around me had to think with clarity, and we judged that his death wasn't evidence for Voldemort's return.
I'm assuming you thought that he could have been killed by someone else.
Yes, or that it was an accidental death during the events of the tournament.
Yet, there was a reluctance to investigate the matter fully. At the time, it wasn't made clear how Cedric Diggory died. Why was that?
We were investigating the matter, as should be the case with any tragic incident like that. Before our investigation concluded, however, Voldemort had returned, so there was no need to continue.
Mr. Fudge, you knew Professor Dumbledore very well.
More than most, yes.
What made you doubt what he was saying?
It's very simple, Miss Sterling. He was standing where I was standing. How was he to know? And when he did present anything, it was all circumstantial, about Death Eater gatherings and the increase of dark events taking place, and the testimony of Harry Potter, which, as I've explained, I didn't accept at the time.
How was your relationship with him before all of this?
I'd say it was cordial. I used to take counsel from him on certain matters, you know, when I thought his expertise would help.
Then why relegate his opinions when he came to you with something so vital?
Because I didn't believe what he was saying. I don't know what else you want me to say. If I take someone's advice on some matters, it doesn't mean I should take advice from them on all matters.
Some argue that you went beyond skepticism and into the realm of outright hostility. You had Professor Dumbledore removed from several influential positions, and Harry was publicly branded as a liar by the Ministry. Looking back, do you believe those actions were justified?
I'm sorry, how did I manage to do that?
I mean, we know from articles at the time the Daily Prophet went on a smear campaign to make Dumbledore and Harry Potter appear mad and like liars.
I know, I remember, but what has that got to do with me?
Some have argued that the Daily Prophet was relaying what you instructed them to share with the wider community.
I don't understand why on earth anyone would think that. The Daily Prophet is a newspaper, Miss Sterling. Newspapers love to destroy politicians and love a bit of hysteria. Why on earth would they align themselves with me? It would have made more sense for them to cry, "Voldemort has returned," and Fudge is a twit on the very same page, and people would have read the publication to laugh and cry at the same time. You're giving me way too much credit, believe me.
I mean, they did align themselves with you. I guess you yourself can shed some light on why they might have done so.
It's very simple. Because they thought it was a false rumour too. Now, is that beyond the realms of possibility?
It is within the realms of possibility, sure. However, some have suggested that you were being pressured by the likes of Lucius Malfoy, who might have had a vested interest in covering up the idea that Voldemort returned, considering he aligned himself with Voldemort as a Death Eater. Were you pressured in such ways?
What a profound question. The answer is no.
I don't think it will help your cause if you shout at me, Mr. Fudge.
If you ask preposterous questions, I might respond in a preposterous manner.
I don't think it is preposterous. We know that Mr. Malfoy was active in and around the Ministry at the time, and there are reports that you were very close to him, being friendly like watching Quidditch together in the same box during the 1994 World Cup.
So what? We can't enjoy a game of Quidditch together?
It's the timing of the meeting that raises suspicions, Mr. Fudge.
Look, I don't even remember if I ever went to a game of Quidditch with Lucius Malfoy. I'm just asking, if I did go to watch a game of Quidditch with him, what's the problem? The link between me watching a game of Quidditch and then enchanting the Daily Prophet to do my bidding is in people's imaginations. There is a gap the size of Lake Windermere between those two things.
Yes, but we are not focusing on it in isolation. All things considered, your refusal to listen to Dumbledore, the obvious smear campaign by the Daily Prophet, in addition to being close to someone who turned out to be a follower of Voldemort, is what catches people's attention.
All circumstantial.
You don't want to add anything else to that?
No, not really. I think those with an open mind understood what I said.
Speaking of open-mindedness, Mr. Fudge, what are your opinions on the use of propaganda?
Well, I guess I can define it for you. It is the spreading of misinformation to promote a political cause.
No, I'm asking you what you think about it.
It's not very impartial, this interview, is it, Miss Sterling?
It's impartial in the sense that it is a reflection of what people are thinking. I'm trying to be the messenger without letting my personal biases come into play.
Let me tell you something, young lady. You're not doing a good job in keeping your personal biases to yourself. I recommend you work on that if you want to appear as if you are. Now, to answer your question, propaganda is bad. There you go.
Even for a good cause such as maintaining stability?
Yes, even for a good cause such as maintaining stability. Our media is very free and it should always remain so.
Just to clarify, you didn't use propaganda for a good cause such as maintaining stability at any time during your career.
I did what was right at the time, which was to maintain calm without evidence. The Daily Prophet just happened to agree with me. I have nothing more to add to that.
Okay, Mr. Fudge. Looking back, do you regret how you handled the situation with Harry Potter and Dumbledore?
I said I have nothing more to add to that.
Sorry, I should have premised that on the fact that I've moved on from your influence over the media and the influence of other powerful figures over you. I'm just asking you now, having seen how things transpired, do you personally regret anything from that period?
I think regret is a tricky thing. I regret that we were all put in that situation to begin with. I regret that there was so much distrust and division. But do I regret the decisions I made? No, I don't. I did what any leader should do, make the best decision they can with the information they have. If people want to criticize that now, that's their prerogative. But I won't apologize for trying to protect our society from chaos.
Okay, thank you for your honesty, Mr. Fudge. It's clear that your time as minister was filled with difficult decisions. Before we move on, have you reached out to Harry Potter to talk about any of these matters in subsequent years?
No, I haven't reached out, and as far as I'm aware, he hasn't reached out to me either. I've bumped into him at the ministry here and there, and at public events. But we each have our own lives and responsibilities now. The past is something we both have moved beyond, it appears. I think it's best for everyone if we focus on the present and future, rather than rehashing old conflicts.
Bearing in mind it turned out that Harry Potter was telling the truth and then he went on to perform all the heroics we are all familiar with, would you ever say sorry to him?
I would say that I'm sorry that he had to go through such an ordeal, and I would thank him for his services to the magical world. I wouldn't say sorry for the decisions I made at the time, because I'd be lying to him if I did.
You put him on trial for the use of underaged magic, despite the fact that he was attacked by a Dementor. You questioned his sanity despite the fact that Voldemort had actually returned, and he went on to save the world. Is an apology for those errors too much to ask?
Yes, it is, because they were not errors. They were calculated and educated inferences based on the information we had.
Mr. Fudge, you were deposed. Once it became clear to everyone that Voldemort had returned, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Do you think that tarnished your legacy in any way?
Maybe so. No Minister for Magic wants to be deposed. When I became Minister for Magic, I dreamed of becoming the most celebrated Minister for Magic there ever was. And if anyone doesn't have those dreams, they are not fit to take office. Nevertheless, it might be a consequence of my choices, and I have learned to live with that. I did the best I could.
Were you afraid at the time, Mr. Fudge?
Afraid of what?
Considering what may be calculated and educated inferences based on the information at hand, some could argue that you didn't want to accept that Voldemort had returned.
And if I was, would he have not returned?
No, he would have still returned despite your fear.
So it wouldn't make sense for me to take action based on fear, would it? I would have been afraid, and he would have still popped up. So what good is this question?
The implication is that you were afraid to face up to the reality because the potential consequences were too scary to imagine.
Nonsense. A leader must always do what is right, however terrifying the context is. I was not afraid of that one bit.
I can tell you, Mr. Fudge, based on our research, the vast majority of witches and wizards believe you were slow to act because you were afraid at the time.
And I can tell you, based on the research I have conducted my entire life, the vast majority of witches and wizards do not understand the nuances of managing a population. So what, if that's what they think?
Well, you began the interview by saying that you want to set the record straight. It is an opportunity to change their minds.
Those who can will have done so already. Those who can't won't change their mind ever, that's what I think.
Mr. Fudge, is it true that Professor Dumbledore once told you that if you acknowledged that Voldemort had returned, you could go down as one of the great ministers of magic because it would have allowed you to deal with the threat more effectively?
He did. He said something along those lines, yes.
Instead of being remembered as a deposed leader, you could have been the savior of the magical community. Do you think it was a missed opportunity to become a legendary figure?
Well, I mean, that goes without saying. There isn't much thought required to answer that. But what happened, happened.
And you still maintain that you have no regrets.
Actually, that one does sting a bit, but only for a moment. However, once I have cleared my emotions, I remember that it couldn't have been any other way.
Was that an admission of regret, Mr. Fudge?
Yes, you can have that one. Dumbledore wasn't always wrong, just like he wasn't always right.
That's very interesting that you regret that, but not the choices you made.
And why is that?
I think we'll let the listeners decide why.
Are you implying it is because it is related to my personal ambitions?
No, I didn't imply anything. I left it open for others to decide. I'm going to leave it at that and ask you about what you are up to nowadays, if that's okay.
For the record, it is not because of a desire for glory that I regret it. Some form of admiration would have been an unintended consequence of predicting Voldemort's re-emergence sooner. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, Mr. Fudge, you've made yourself clear. And I just remembered there is actually something else that I would like to ask before I move on. When you were in charge, Voldemort's followers carried out attacks on Muggles, including one on Brockdale Bridge in 1996 which killed 12 Muggles. Who did you attribute those attacks to?
The intelligence we received indicated that they were the doings of a rogue element. There was no direct evidence that they were carried out by Death Eaters.
Once again, no evidence. Even in hindsight, can't you sympathize with those who say you were too dismissive?
I don't give hindsight any consideration whatsoever, Miss Sterling. Hindsight is fiction, and fiction is unworthy of my attention.
These attacks led to deaths and the exposure of our community. It happened under your watch, Mr. Fudge, after you had received information from Harry Potter and Professor Dumbledore about Voldemort. You don't take any responsibility at all?
I did what I always did and did what made sense. I informed the Muggle Prime Minister and reassured him that we had things under control. There was no reason to do anything else by causing alarm.
Who was the Muggle Prime Minister at the time?
It was a gentleman named John Major.
And did you explain to Mr. Major how these attacks happened?
I told him what needed to be said. I won't disclose too much of that information out of respect for the agreements that exist between our communities. It isn't befitting of a former Minister of Magic to babble about private meetings that took place with Muggles.
I understand. You don't have to. I'm hoping, though, you didn't tell him what you just told us, that you thought it was the work of a random rogue element.
Well, I didn't believe it was Voldemort, so I didn't tell him that it was.
Do you think you filled him with confidence?
I couldn't care less whether or not I filled him with confidence. I went there to do the job of a leader, and I did.
How do you think things...
You know what? To be frank, I don't care much for this interview either. You aren't who I thought you were. You seem to be someone hell-bent on uncovering old tales. I think we should stop here.
Are you sure? I apologize if I've upset you. I only have a couple more questions.
No, I understand why you came today. There is absolutely no need. You've added nothing more to this discussion.
I was going to ask you about how things might have been...
It doesn't matter. I don't care. Time is up.
All right, Mr. Fudge. If you've made the decision to stop the interview, we can stop here. Regardless, I would like to thank you for your responses. I actually think you represented your side with clarity.
Yes. Now please leave the premises as quickly as you can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fudge, for your time, and thanks to the listeners for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.